happened almost a decade ago when I was 13 years old. I remember my friend and I were excited about our first time trick-or-treating without our parents. We lived in a small town where nothing ever happens, and we thought it would be the same that night. It started like any other Halloween night. We collected candy, ran into many of our classmates, and had a lot of fun. At 8 p.m, we realised we had to head home, but on the way back, we dropped by our teacher's house. She wasn't home, and the street didn't have many streetlights. To add to this, most of the houses had their lights turned off, and the Halloween decorations were taken down. My friend and I were slightly spooked and disappointed by the lack of candy. We wanted to get out of the street as soon as possible. That's when a man emerged from under one of the few streetlights. It was a police officer. Neither of us seemed to notice him before this, possibly due to the darkness. He startled us, but seemed very friendly. The cop introduced himself and pointed to an inconspicuous bungalow. He said an old man living in this house was inviting trick-or-treaters inside. Someone called the police, but when he arrived, no one was answering the door. He kept telling us his police car and partner were just around the block. We looked around, but couldn't see them. I was a pretty paranoid kid growing up. My mum loved watching crime shows, and she'd always tell me the tidbits of lessons. One of these was a story about fake cops. Although I don't remember the details, I remembered people can pretend to be police officers to gain trust. Throughout this whole exchange, I was terrified. His lack of badge, police car, and partner did not feel right. I was also conflicted because he was smiling and seemed like he just wanted to help. That was until we heard his strange request. He said he needed to speak to this potential predator and needed our help. Since we were young girls, the man would answer if we knocked. The officer claimed he would hide behind the bushes next to the front door. He would wait for him to invite us in, jump out, and catch him red-handed. At that moment, I knew my friend felt the same way I did. We both fell silent, but one of us managed to ask if we could talk amongst ourselves. The cop said yes, but told us we had limited time. The street was silent. He could hear everything. I remember the feeling of wanting to say something, but fearing he would hear us and escalate the situation. We just stared at each other for what felt like forever. The cop was getting increasingly impatient and told us we had to decide quickly. Around that moment, a family came down the street and noticed the officer. They were coming over to see what was happening. That's when the cop said he'd be right back and not to go anywhere. My friend and I scrambled to collect our thoughts and decided to run away. We sprinted out of the street and didn't look back. On our way home, we discussed theories that ranged from him being a fake cop, him playing a prank on us, or him being a real cop, but we misunderstood the situation. When we told our parents, we downplayed it a lot and doubted our experience. In the end, we didn't call the police, but our dads drove to the house and area around the house. No cop cars or police officers were in sight. Over the years, I can say I regret not calling the police. At the time, my friend and I were convinced we misunderstood what happened. We even told our class the next day, and most, including our teacher, thought it wasn't alarming. Looking back, I find it extremely strange a police officer would put two children in such a potentially dangerous situation. I wonder what his motives were, but it will forever, unfortunately, remain unsolved. This took place a while ago. I was 13 and my family had just moved to a new town. A new friend of mine from school and I made plans to go trick-or-treating together. At the time, I remember thinking I was a bit too old to still be trick-or-treating, but who doesn't want free candy? My friend and I figured we still had 1 year of trick-or-treating left in us. Because we were 13 and lived in a fairly safe neighbourhood, my parents thought it was fine for us to trick-or-treat together without adult supervision. Everything was going great and we were having fun, getting some solid candy. Then we rang on one guy's doorbell. The porch light was on and there was a pumpkin or two. So we figured the people in the house were likely to be handing out candy. A middle-aged man opened the door. At first, I was glad because he was dressed in costume and happy to see my friend and I. So I felt we were in for some top-tier candy. I don't even remember what candy he handed out, but I do remember what happened next, which is weird because we were 13, so we didn't really think anything of it. Then he asked if he could take our photo. He said he always liked to take photos of the kids every Halloween because he loved seeing the costumes. On one of his walls were a bunch of pictures of different, random, unrelated children in Halloween costumes. Even being a dumb 13-year-old, I was starting to get kind of creeped out. But I figured it was best not to upset the man and let him take the picture, and then we could leave. So he snaps the photo of us, and then he pulls out a clipboard with a sheet of paper on it with a bunch of names written in childish handwriting. He says he likes the kids whose pics he snaps to sign their names so he can know who they are. At this point, we were both mega creeped out. We should have just run away, but we were too conditioned not to be rude. I decided to sign a fake name. He looked at the paper, looked back up at me, and then down at the paper. Then he repeated the fake name I'd given and nodded. After that, he didn't do anything, and we were free to leave. But it definitely creeped us both out. At the time, I thought he was just an eccentric guy, but as an adult looking back on the story, it seems much more sinister. I'm so glad nothing bad happened to us, and hope nothing bad happened to any other kids. Halloween, with all these costumed kids trick-or-treating in the dark and minimal parental supervision, could be a great opportunity for predators to get kids alone in their homes, with no one knowing where the kids are. Please stay safe out there, and happy Halloween. So this happened on Halloween when I was about 11. My friend and I decided to go trick-or-treating. Yeah, we're a little old, but just wanted some free candy. I lived in a very nice neighbourhood, one of those ones where everyone gives out the full-size candy bars, so it wasn't unusual to have a lot of people come there to trick-or-treat. However, that also meant that there's about an acre of front yard for each house, so it took about 3 minutes to walk between each door. It was a good night for Halloween weather-wise. Not too chilly, not rainy or anything. This is important later. So it's approaching 8:30 p.m, and after hanging around on the golf course and appreciating our candy haul, we decide to start heading home and call it a night. The street I live on is a gigantic U shape, like a little over half a mile walk from the top of the U, down the bend to the other side. We were walking towards the end of the U, further from my house, as we wanted to take the long way because it was such a nice night out. It's about 9 p.m. now, so no one else is really out anymore at this point, and people turn off their porch lights, the universal signal for no more trick-or-treaters. That's when we notice a lone white van parked on the street. We made a joke about how it looks like one of those stereotypical kidnap vans with the painted windows. That's when we notice it shift out of park and slowly creep down the street towards us and park at the next house. They must have kids trick-or-treating. It wasn't uncommon for people to drive their kids from house to house, since they were so spread out in our neighbourhood. But given that it was 9 p.m. and a night with nice weather, it struck us as a bit odd. We checked every few minutes, and it seemed to be just stopping from house to house like normal. We turned around again and kept walking at a leisurely pace, gossiping and whatnot. That's when we hear the car squeal as it moved forward down the hill and park again. This time, only about 2 houses away from us, on the opposite side of the street. Again, weird time to trick-or-treat, but whatever. That's when we realised that there were no kids getting out of the van. Not once. Now this was before my first phone. Since it was only 2008, we were about 15 minutes from my house, but a bit disturbed. So we walked to the nearest door, rang the bell, and stuck our bags out in an attempt to act normal. A woman opens the door just a crack and proceeds to berate us for trick-or-treating at a late hour, and slams the door before we could even say a word. Okay, thanks lady. We turn around and the van is right there, parked in the wrong direction on our side of the street. The windows are tinted, so we can't even see the guy driving. Trying to keep our cool, we casually walk away from the door and up the street into this cul-de-sac loop that's on the side of the street that makes up the bigger U. If you cut through that loop and hop a couple fences, you can end up at my back door. The van goes the same way. Now we know he's following us, since there's no reason for him to go up this side street otherwise. We break into a sprint and I am by no means athletic, but I hop those fences like I was an Olympian. We run inside my house, lock all the doors, and freak out while we sit in the front hall. Not 5 minutes later, the van slowly drives down the street past my house. We stress eat our candy and think of what could have happened if we hadn't been aware of our surroundings. Fake trick-or-treater man with the creepy white van? Let's not meet. It was my turn to take the kids trick-or-treating. The previous year it was my wife's, and we trade back and forth every year. My son and daughter are aged 7 and 9. Usually, I stay on the street when my kids go up to the different houses to collect candy. After about half an hour of walking around, we came to one of the more popular hotspots for candy collecting, a main street in the neighbourhood. Lots of really cool decorations and animatronics on people's front yards. I became a bit distracted and stopped watching my kids closely. At one point, they came back from a house accompanied by another girl, about the same height as my daughter. She was wearing a weird homemade mask, like a cardboard cutout or something. My daughter asked me if she could trick-or-treat with us, so I said sure, and we carried on together as a group. I didn't know who this girl was, but I figured she was a friend from school. As we continued, I started to notice a large man trailing us. He was wearing some sort of angry cat mask. It was kind of creepy, to be honest. I thought that maybe he was the father of the girl, so I tried to start up some small chat with him. I said something like, "Nice weather, hey?" But he didn't respond. He just stood there staring at me, while our kids went up the stairs to the next house. I tried again, asking, "Hey, is that your daughter?" He nodded, but didn't say anything. I figured he just wasn't in the mood for chatting, so I stopped trying. We carried on for about another 15 minutes, until suddenly, my kids came up to me and they said they wanted to go home. This surprised me, as we hadn't been out for too long, and their bags were only about a third full. In any case, I agreed, waved goodbye at the man in the cat mask and his daughter, and started on our way home. The weird thing is that when I glanced back, the man and his daughter were just standing there, staring at us. I checked one more time as we turned the corner, and they were still standing there, not having moved at all. I decided to ask my kids, "So who was that girl?" My daughter looked up at me with a confused look on her face. "She's your friend," my daughter replied. I asked her what she meant. Apparently, the girl with the cardboard mask approached them and said she was a friend of mine. She told my daughter she was too shy to ask me if she could join us to trick-or-treat, and wanted my daughter to ask me instead. I laughed at this story and replied to my daughter, "Why would you think she was my friend? I don't have any children friends." What my daughter said next chilled my bones. According to her, when the girl with the cardboard mask approached them for the first time, she wasn't wearing a mask, so they were able to see her face. As it turns out, she wasn't a girl at all, but an older woman around my age with wrinkles on her face. What's even more disturbing, the old woman had started to steal treats from my daughter's bag, apparently when I wasn't looking. This is why they asked me to go home. The old woman was creeping them out, and they wanted to just get away from her. I brought my kids home and told my wife what happened. We made sure to check through all their candy, but didn't find anything suspicious or off. We didn't call the police or anything since nothing really happened. But thinking back, I kind of regret that decision now. What the heck was this old woman doing? And who the hell was that man following us around? I don't think I'll ever know. And I just think it's sick that there are people out there on Halloween hiding behind masks, pretending to be children. This happened on Halloween night. I was a freshman in high school. My friends and I weren't quite at the point in high school where we would have any sort of Halloween party to go to, and we were way too cool to go trick-or-treating, obviously. We were a tight-knit group of 5 girls. We'd grown up together since we were babies and lived in a small rural town outside of city limits. To set the scene, this is a very remote, woodsy area. One of our friends, let's call her T, her parents raised chickens and had about 50 acres filled with chicken houses, which we would explore on her 4-wheeler after school quite often. The build-up to this night was filled with adrenaline and methodical planning. In our small town, one of the more thrill-seeking activities to do was what we call rolling yards. If you're not from a southern or rural area, this is basically throwing rolls of toilet paper up into trees so that streams of toilet paper hang down. Classic prank. Had a crush on a guy from class. Rolling yards. Girl drama revenge. Rolling yards. It's hard to explain the kind of adrenaline that you get sneaking down a rural 2-lane road in the pitch black, turning down a long gravel driveway, threatening the group's lives if they make a sound. If you get caught, your parents find out, and maybe worse, you are stuck cleaning up the mess the next day. So my friends and I decided the 2 weeks prior to this night that we were going to go on a Halloween rampage, and specifically, we were going to roll the creepy house right down the rural road my friend T lived on. This house had been a big scare story between my friends and I for years. We would go on afternoon walks after school and pass by it often. No one ever came in or out of the house, but T's parents told us that a man lived there and that he was a bit of a creep. She gave us strict warning to stay away from the area. T's mum worked in law enforcement, and she probably knew much more sinister reasons for us to stay away than she told us at the time. The night would go as such. T's older sister, B, who was 17 at the time, would drive us to the local Walmart after T's mum and dad went to bed. B was the kind of cool older sister who was in on our shenanigans and thought it was fun to chaperone us whenever we were doing crazy things. All 5 of us loaded up into the back seat of B's car, piling onto each other's laps, blaring our favourite 2000s hip-hop songs and flying down the 2-lane curvy road. A scary thought in of itself at this point in my life, but nothing happened. Thank goodness. We park in the near empty parking lot of the store around 11:30 p.m. and made our way towards the toilet paper aisle, hyped up on pure adrenaline. We filled 2 shopping carts completely full of the 99-cent rolls of toilet paper, snickering to ourselves as the clerk eyed us suspiciously while checking us out. We ran giddy back to B's car, popped the trunk, and threw the loads of toilet paper into the trunk. On the way back towards T's town, out of city limits, we turned down the music to discuss the play-by-play of our attack. B would park down a dirt road that led to some cow pastures about a mile from the man's, we'll call him Mr. S, his driveway, to wait on us. The 5 of us would split up into teams, walking along the edge of the woods by the road quietly, just in case a car would pass. This would make it easy for us to drop down to the ground and hide. We filled our arms full of rolls of toilet paper and headed toward the long gravel road of Mr. S's house. The adrenaline practically beating out of my eardrums, the crickets in the background screeching in synchronicity. We make about 10 yards from the entrance of the driveway and unload the toilet paper we had carried, then quietly made our way back towards B's trunk to get the next load of toilet paper. Once all the toilet paper was piled into our checkpoint, at the edge of the woods by the entrance, we each grabbed 4 rolls and went into the woods along each side of the gravel driveway to creep towards the house, all whispering to each other to shut up, shh, dude, shut up, we're going to get caught if you don't stop, shh. We finally see faint light coming from the side of the house by Mr. S's garage, and it was the most terrified I'd ever been. Not only was the house 1000% creepier in this moment than when we walked past it during the day, but the thought of getting caught by the man we were specifically told to stay away from was nauseating. T was definitely the bravest and most rambunctious of the bunch. She decides to make a beeline towards the garage while walking through the edge of the woods, and we watched her in pure shock. She stood near the woods, peeking out, and motioned for us to make our move, confirming that no lights in the house were on, and Mr. S was 99% likely asleep inside. I stood frozen, scared. I would pee my pants if I moved, but was ushered along by another girl who pointed to the tall oak tree at the very front of Mr. S's house, which was the worst location imaginable. I decided my teammates were worth it, and I ripped open a pack of toilet paper and hurled it up towards the sky, towards the highest branch on the tree, watching the stream of white paper fly down and catch the wind. Soon, streams of white were falling out of every tree surrounding the house, and we were getting very cocky and even more fearless the longer we attacked. All of a sudden, my friend T stopped dead in her tracks and made a loud hush noise. I stopped, hiding behind a tree, my heart literally in my throat, as I now saw what looked like lights turning on from inside the house. Out of the corner of my eye, T then whisper yelled, "Run!" And we dropped our remaining rolls of toilet paper and began running in the pitch black dark into the woods. Another girl in the group tripped and fell on a branch behind me. Several gunshots rang loudly from near the house, and Mr. S was yelling maniacally into the woods, "You assholes think you're funny? Not so funny when I find you." We kept running, all crying, wheezing from the adrenaline, and sped into the night towards the entrance of the driveway. When we were about to reach the entrance, we heard something even worse than gunshots. The sound of a diesel truck engine coming down the gravel driveway. We quickly went as deep into the woods as we could, without notifying him we were hiding, and stood silently with our hands over our mouths as not to make a noise. Mr. S stopped his truck about 30 yards away and turned off his engine. It was totally silent. I could see him from where I stood, and he had a shotgun over his shoulder as he walked towards the opposite side of the driveway, clearly looking and listening intently. In that moment, I truly thought we were going to be found and killed. No one except for B knew where we were. Our parents were all asleep. She was a mile down the road, oblivious, in her car, and I was trying desperately not to cry and sniffle in the silence. When I saw Mr. S's shadow raising his shotgun into the air and firing around, I began to feel faint, truly thinking I was about to pass out from fear, when I see car lights just up the road from the driveway. Panicking, I wondered if the lights would illuminate us in the woods and give us away, but the car seemed to slow down, and I realised it was B. B rolled down her window and was talking loudly from her open car window, giving what I assumed were the police the address of Mr. S's house. This made him angry, and he yelled and ran towards her car, then backed away, cursing loudly and waving his gun into the air. As soon as Mr. S began driving his truck back down the driveway towards his house, we sprinted full speed towards B's car and got in. We were crying hysterically, unable to speak, sweat pouring down us. No one said a word. We cried all the way back to T's house, showered, and I could hear sniffles and crying all throughout the night into the morning. No one said a word about it to T or B's parents. No one even spoke about it amongst each other for years. We never went rolling again, to say the least. What had begun as a childish prank turned out to be one of the most horrifying experiences of my teenage years. Because we lived in the middle of nowhere, and we had technically been vandalising someone's yard, B told us about a week later that she had faked the call with 911. It's still shocking to think about it. All I can say is we got lucky that night. Some angel somewhere was watching out for us. Looking back, B should have actually called 911. We were naive kids who were more afraid of getting in trouble than realising how at risk we were of being hurt or killed.